All right, folks, we are back. We are live. Had a little bit of a technical issue there. Again, this is Rick Robinson, host of America Off the Rails. I am joined today by a guest who is sitting in with me quite frequently lately, and we're going to be continuing a conversation that we had last night. So if, you may want to go back and check out the podcast for last night if you haven't yet. Good evening, Patrick. How are you, sir? Sorry about that technical issue there at the very beginning.
No problem, Rick. I'm doing great, and thank you for having me back on to pick up on our conversation. I was really enjoying it.
No problem at all. Now, I just kind of want to bring something up here because we were talking a little bit off air, and you had said that the events in Paris had kind of reminded you of some parallels that you had gone through in your own life. Before we get back to what we were talking about last night, if you don't mind, why don't you go ahead and share some of what we were talking about off the air with the listeners? Because I was rather intrigued by your story. I think they might be too.
Well, I was out of the country when 9/11 happened, and my girlfriend, Dana, who's a flight attendant, she was flying at the time, and I couldn't get a hold of her, and I was quite concerned after I saw what happened, but finally I did, and she related the story to me about how as she was flying into New York, seeing the first tower burning, and then after landing from New Jersey, I think the second tower fell or was hit, and having to leave by car out of New York was the only way to get out and head for safety, basically, with some other people. So she thought on her feet very quickly and got the heck out of there, which I think we had, kind of discussed before if anything like that were to happen. And being out of the country at the time, I was actually around some people that were quite, gleeful that America got hit. And it was very strange, and it was hard to deal with. And as I said to you previously, I dealt with it in what I thought was an American way. I couldn't show as much anger as I felt at the reaction I saw around me, but I was able to bring it down to a personal basis and say, well, here's the thing. What if it was your family or your child or whatever that was in those towers? And that had a sobering effect, to the situation and conversation. I later ended up at it was that night or the night after, ended up at a company party. And, I worked with people from England and Canada and France, and the Americans were far and few between. There was one or two. And at the party, I really wasn't in a mood for a party. I was obligated to go because it was basically kind of a company function. And, it kind of became a game to, I think, to get me to speak about the event and what happened and what I thought America should do and what we should do as a country. And I resisted that for a few hours. And before leaving, I was cornered by a few people, and they wanted to hear my opinion as the American, so to speak. I shared it with them, and I don't think that I'll ever forget the look of shock on their faces as to what I had to say. It's very strange to grow up in America, but to have been in that situation and understand that the worldview of what people are taught or how they perceive America in other countries can be so different. And right now, I kind of fear, Rick, that we have our own American jihad going, from preschool to college and then beyond into the corporate and, of course, political world. So as I was saying to you in our last conversation, that culturally and politically, socially, the kind of the degradation of the idea of America, with the jihad, by the way, being led by an adolescent, childish, petulant president. This has kind of been a long arc for me to think back to that day, then understand where we are now, and look at the events in Paris, and kind of have all these memories. These are things I think of quite often at 9/11, et cetera, but have them kind of well up in a way that's very, very sharpened and focused and raw, to where I can still feel them and see them.
Well, no, and that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to open with that, because you brought up some things that actually will hopefully be some of the things that we'll actually touch on today. With the world's reaction and the way that we're reacting to the Paris events, I think there are some interesting parallels there, because the American public as a whole are shocked and appalled by the behavior of the extremists, and our politicians in D.C., for the most part, seem to be completely numb to the behavior of the extremists and seem to want to sweep everything back under the rug or put their head back in the sand or pretend like none of it ever happened. Particularly the petulant man-child that you were referring to earlier. We actually have a clip we'll be playing from him here in a minute today that actually he made a statement today that within hours blew up in his face in multiple fronts, which doesn't surprise me, because much like last week, on about last Thursday, when he made the statement that ISIS was contained, and then here we are 24 hours after the fact, and they had the most well-coordinated and most well-organized terrorist attack event since 9/11, which is what you were just referring to. But the interesting thing about it is the liberal response to all of it, because I see so many things that just make me want to start screaming, because it's people just don't seem to pay attention anymore. They lead with their feelings, and that is it. I see all of these stories that are coming out now about how the American public during World War II was opposed to bringing in Jewish refugees because they felt it was going to be a drain on the economy, and they were opposed to it in about the same numbers that we're opposed to the Syrian refugees now. But the thing that I keep trying to make all of these liberals understand when I try to talk to them about this is not a valid comparison. This is apples and oranges at this point. The Jewish people were not actively engaging, whether in part or in whole, in trying to wipe people out. The most apt comparison to what these folks are trying to say that we need to do would be for us to say that we were going to start bringing Germans into the country, not knowing which of them were Nazis, Nazi sympathizers, or just regular plain old folks. And that's the part of this that I can't seem to make anybody understand. You are asking us to possibly import the enemy into our borders. To me, this makes as much sense as leaving your doors unlocked at night and just saying anybody can come in and do whatever they want.
Well, there's a couple of things there, Rick. One is the particular incident you're talking about. I think the ship was called the St. Louis, and the rejection of that ship to be able to port in Miami, I think it was actually. But anyhow, you're witnessing the coordinated deflection that the left uses and the projection that they use all the time. It's a tactic, and you could see it filter through the television and radio waves today. Using the Syrian immigration issue that you referenced to change the subject, basically. And at the same time, they have to say, well, look at this other bad thing that we did. Well, the bad thing that we did was in accordance with really hundreds of years of immigration laws that were quite restricted. The floodgates really didn't open up until the Kennedy and Johnson administration. But before that, as far as the laws that were on the books, or when we took a hiatus from immigration for the specific intent of letting the immigrants that were already in the country assimilate, or where we've had mass deportations at times. These are things that somebody like Obama and the progressives and the Democrat Party, they're certainly not going to acknowledge. They do trade in that currency of guilt and of ignorance. And to see what I saw today, to have a senator from a quite big state, Texas, who's running for president, Senator Cruz, stand there and openly challenge Obama to a debate, saying, why don't you come back from overseas? Obviously, everybody knows that traditionally presidents go overseas, they leave domestic politics at the door, but this president never has. He takes it with him everywhere, and he took the chance from the Philippines to take a shot at the Republicans, but really at the American people, because he's not getting his way. So he thought he'd stomp his foot in another, venue and hope that the Filipino people he's talking to would buy his nonsense. He'd get his message out. It's kind of like a drive-by shooting. And to have Cruz challenge him, and I thought, my gosh, I think that Ted Cruz, probably like a lot of people, doesn't have an enormous amount of respect for the president, but he actually didn't show much respect for the office either. And that's what Barack Obama has brought to the office of the presidency. He has degraded it to the point, him with his own actions himself, and then the office to a point. Now he's become irrelevant in the world to a degree, which is making America irrelevant to some of the current situations in the world. And it's really stunning to see. I think that emotionally and possibly mentally and in other ways, I think there's a chance that President Obama might have some deeper-seated problems than any of us know. At least that's what I see on the surface anyhow. That's the only conclusion I can draw, is just a layman observing his actions and his words.
Speaking of that pot shot that he took today, we actually have a little bit of an excerpt of that. It's going to run for about a minute.
These are the same folks oftentimes who suggest that they're so tough that just talking to Putin or staring down ISIL or using some additional rhetoric somehow is going to solve the problems out there. But apparently they're scared of widows and orphans coming into the United States of America as part of our tradition of compassion. First they were worried about the press being too tough on them during debates. Now they're worried about 3-year-old orphans. That doesn't sound very tough to me. They've been playing on fear in order to try to score political points or to advance their campaigns. And it's irresponsible. And it's contrary to who we are. And it needs to stop because the world is watching.
All right, so I have a question. How is trying to exercise common sense contrary to who we are? Because he's brought up some pretty interesting points in that 58-second segment where basically we as conservatives are touting fear of widows and toddlers. But here's the interesting point. If you break down the demographics of the Syrian refugees, about 97% of them are between the ages of 18 and 35 years old, which is basically prime military fighting ages. You also take into account the fact that shortly after he made this statement, 2 separate stories broke. One of a female suicide bomber who ignited herself and basically blew up a bomb in Paris. Another of apparently a 10-year-old child who had a bomb strapped to them, who probably had no idea that there was a bomb strapped to them, that was blown up in another country. And yet he wants to make arrogant statements about how we're the ones that are doing nothing but using fear to keep people out of our country. I'm going to say the same thing I've been saying on Twitter all day today. I don't hate the Syrian refugees just because I don't necessarily want them here. I don't hate the people of the world that I lock my doors at night to keep them out. It doesn't have anything to do with hating those people. It has more to do with wanting to keep the people that are inside my home safe. This country is my home. I want to keep the people that are already here safe. if we are not careful, we are going to invite the same thing that has happened in Paris and is starting to happen all over the world. We are going to invite it right here because ISIS has already told us that they will infiltrate these refugees if we bring them into our country. And there was another story today that broke in another country where they found yet another 6 Syrian terrorists that were inside the refugees. They're basically using fake Greek passports to try to get into America. But they didn't even make it out of Europe before they were caught. So again, which one of us are being crazy here? Because I don't understand this anymore. When did common sense become a sin?
Well, I think they were coming up through Honduras, and obviously they would then, attempt to get to the southern border of the United States, Central America to Mexico, and then into the U.S. Is where I think they thought they were headed. Anyhow, for Obama to continue to try to be the moral arbiter of our feelings and dish out the guilt with the that's not who we are stuff again. It's kind of comical. It would be comical if it wasn't so serious. He didn't seem to be all that worried about the 3-year-old children and the widows when he could have played a major hand in stopping Assad from killing 250,000 of the Syrians that he is so worried about now. And this comes down to a Chicago-style political mentality where dead Syrians can't vote. If he brings in live Syrians into the U.S., 80% of American Muslims vote Democrat. That's where his concern lies, plus he wants to make the Republicans look bad. But he has no moral authority left. He has very little political capital left on both sides of the aisle because he's never fostered any strong relationships with even with Democrats to a degree. And as far as the 3-year-old child goes, I'm certainly not afraid of the 3-year-old child. No American is. But the party I was talking about after 9/11, Dana and I still, my girlfriend Dana and I still talk about those events quite often, and her description of what she saw and how vivid and visceral it was to her was obviously fresh in my mind, on the 12th or whatever. And the people that confronted me at the party wanted to know what I wanted to do about it. After I told them, like I said, they were a little bit, kind of had shocked looks on their faces. One of the people said to me, well, what good is it going to be killing a 10-year-old boy in the desert in the Mideast? And I said, because in 10 years he'll be a 20-year-old man with a bomb belt strapped to him in New York. And this is a war. France realizes it. Putin realizes it, maybe for some different reasons, but he's going to take advantage of it. And I don't blame the French for being angry. I wish that we would have handled the aftermath of 9/11 a bit differently, and we have Obama now describing these horrific events in Paris as a setback. And him, Obama, Kerry, many people in his administration, but those two in particular, they've just become news reporters, if you think about it, Rick. They come on TV, they relate the story that everybody knows, and they say, yeah, it was horrible, and we still have a lot of work to do. Or the economy's bad, but we had some success, and we still have a lot of work to do. Or they just basically parrot whatever is going on, pat themselves on the back to whatever degree that they can, and then say, but there's still a lot of work to do. So nothing, it's all a big work in progress, and we're just supposed to patiently wait for the progressive utopia to suddenly appear before us. And this mentality, like I say, has now been instilled from preschoolers to college students that demand things out of life when they don't have a life. They've never had a life. They need to get a life. And they're rich kids that are just being leftists for the sake of being leftists. And as I often say, Bill Ayers was a rich kid, and he didn't start out by building bombs. But we are in the middle of our kind of, as I said at the beginning of the interview, our own American jihad, led by guys like Obama and Kerry. And they've evolved from being ridiculous and petulant into just being disgusting, in my view.
I mean, and you bring up some interesting points, but let's backtrack for a second, because you brought up the whole France and Putin thing. There was a story that actually broke about that I honestly have to admit, for once, I was unaware. Apparently, Russia and France have basically joined forces. This is, of course, after France had extended us the invitation to join forces with them and help in their fight against ISIS, and our president basically told them no. Around the same time that he made the references you were referring to about the events in France being a terrible setback, but not something that we needed to much concern ourselves with. Is he just completely lost touch with reality? Does he know what's going on? Does he care what's going on? Because it just seems like anytime anything major happens on this man's watch, he just treats it like it's nothing and goes back to his golf game, or goes and hops on a jet and goes and parties with Jay-Z and Beyonce, or just goes back to bed. And I know this wasn't something that happened to Americans or on American soil, but this is a major precursor to what we're going to be facing if we do not wake up. And not only he, but so many people that think the same way that he does refuse to even see that as a possibility, and I don't understand it anymore.
Well, in my book, In Commoner Sense, the closest you can get to a kind of a pseudo-clinical definition of his behavior is malignant narcissism, and I have predicted for years that it will get continually worse by the day. And that is what we're seeing right now. And one of the things that Obama does is, if he can keep whatever he can do to keep everybody relatively calm around him, that shields him from actually having to feel or react to it. And I get caught up in trying to decide when I see him on television whether he's a person that is either heavily medicated or is a person that needs to be heavily medicated. I'm not sure which it is, but there is something very, very, very wrong. And as in continuing our conversation from last night, in my opinion, it is a constitutional, political, social crisis as far as President Obama goes. If he was a Republican, of course, he already would have been thrown out of office. And I wish there was a way to remove him and plant America's foot securely and take a different direction as quickly as possible. With a year left of his presidency, it's starting to sound like he can do a lot more damage than even I thought he was capable of.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because normally by now everybody starts viewing the sitting president as a lame duck. I mean, the election cycle is starting to get into full swing. Everybody starts thinking, well, how much more damage can the guy do? And then you have the fact that, as you said, typically when every other president has gone overseas in whatever duties they had, they would leave domestic policy at the shoreline and go focus on whatever it was they went into that particular country to deal with, and then come home and get back to domestic policy. This president throws all sense of decorum and usual rules for the White House completely out the window. And in doing so, unfortunately, this could be one of those situations where the next little over a year could seem like about 20 by the time he's done doing the damage that he has the potential to be able to do, only because he doesn't know when to come off the bully pulpit.
Well, as with any president, he has to deal with world events and things that happen that are out of his control. And right now, as you and I have both often said, this is, our current time parallels the mid and late 30s to a degree, and but it's accelerated, and who knows what else is going to happen, what other events he might have to field or deal with. So, yes, the damage that can be done in a year by a so-called lame duck president, he's never really challenged by the Republicans, so I don't know how lame he is, but we could be in big trouble. I totally agree with you on that one.
All right, well, we have actually already gotten to the point where we've got to take a really quick break, pay some bills. We'll be right back here in just a moment with my interview guest, Mr. Patrick Fernari, author of Common or Sense, one of the recurring guests here on America Off the Rails. Now, when we come back, we're actually going to ask the question, which is actually the title of the show, see what your answer is, and then kind of expound on that. For anybody who can't see the link or can't see the title, for those of you that are listening on TuneIn or other places, the title of tonight's show is Common Sense Dead in D.C.? Thought it would be an interesting word title based on your book, and also give you a chance to kind of answer that question from your perspective when we come back. But we do need to take a break and pay some bills, folks. I am Rick Robinson. This is America Off the Rails. We'll be back with you here in just a couple minutes. All right, folks, this is Rick Robinson with you. I want to tell you about some friends of mine from a company called Security Enforcement Specialists. When I ran my security agency for 12 years, I worked with one of these partners on a daily basis. He's been involved in this agency now, and with his other partner, they do have over 30 years of experience in the private security industry. If you own a business and you need someone to keep you or your customers or residents safe, then I highly recommend contacting Security Enforcement Specialists today. Give them a call at 405-703-1796. Again, that's 405-703-1796. Again, tell them Rick from K98 Talk sent you. Like I said, if you need the help, they are here for you. So make sure that you go look them up, check them out, and see what they can do.
Wrong way. Welcome to the place.
In these uncertain economic times, you've got to do whatever you can to save money. One of our biggest expenses can be our cars, especially when unexpected repair bills hit. Not anymore. If you own a vehicle with less than 130,000 miles, is less than 12 years old, has a warranty about to expire, or even no warranty at all, you could stop paying for car repairs. Roadside assistance, towing, and rental coverage are all included. Don't wait for the next repair. Make one free call right now to see if you qualify. If your vehicle is less than 12 years old, has less than 130,000 miles, even if it's out of warranty, paying for car repairs can become a thing of the past. Call us right now and get your car protected before your next repair bill hits. Get protection and no more repair bills. Call 800-696-1030. Again, 800-696-1030. That's 800-696-1030. 800-696-1030.
We will never fully understand what we've asked of our military service members or their families, asking them to put themselves in harm's way, to endure it all. But we do understand that it's our turn, our duty, to keep them secure for the rest of their lives. Wounded Warrior Project long-term support programs help our most severely ill or injured veterans live independently, at no cost, for life, so that they might stand at ease. Join us at findwwp.org.
This is Slickery Trigger for Rebel Road Tactical. With proper care and feeding, your pistol will be ready when you need it, there to save your life. Shouldn't your gear be that good? Whether you need a holster for comfortable everyday carry or a tough-as-nails holster for your next training course, Rebel Road Tactical has what you need. Check us out on the web at rebelroadtactical.com.
Calls, we got a pen and telephone to bypass all your laws. Political correctness will replace the Bill of Rights. Support religious freedom, lest you pray to Jesus Christ. The press is in our pockets cause it's free. You cannot make a move, no that.
All right, folks, we are back. back. We are live. This is America Off the Rails, the new late night edition on our home station K98 Talk, where the show can also be heard 3 times a week on Leading Edge, or 5 mornings a week on Leading Edge Radio Network, 5 nights a week on High Point Radio out of New Jersey, 3 times a week on AMFM247.com, 1 morning a week every Sunday on Red State Talk Radio. And at this point, we've gotten in so many places I can't even remember most of them half the time. At some point, I'm going to have my voiceover guy record all of this stuff so I can just start playing it so I don't keep stumbling all over myself. Anyway, we are back. We are live. This is America Off the Rails. I'm Rick Robinson. I am joined again, still in studio, with my good friend Patrick Fernari, who obviously is not in the studio with me because he's currently in another country, but hey, joys of radio, we can give you an illusion if we want to. All right, so Patrick, before we went to break, I did ask you the question, which is the title of today's show. I want to go ahead and give you a chance to get an answer in on that question while we still have some time left. Lord knows you and I start talking, and the next thing we know, it's been 30 minutes. But so the question for today's show is common sense dead in America? Or not necessarily America, but how about, let's start with D.C. Do you feel like it's pretty much dead and gone in D.C. at this point?
Well, yes. One of the main points in my book is that we are being governed by the elites, and I include the media in that, and the political class. In D.C., the streets are paved with gold by the lobbyists that actually write the bills and then pass them to congressmen, and the congressmen are basically used car salesmen that go out there and try to sell the newest law that one of their big donors has paid for. This is very, very far away from our intended system of governance. In Thomas Paine's Common Sense, his language and his appeal, a series of pamphlets that he wrote, were read in every bar and barnyard and school and church to people sometimes because they did not know how to read them themselves, maybe, was the biggest seller of its time, and he appealed to that very innate common sense that Americans have. But no, it doesn't live in D.C. anymore at all. It's all driven by politics and money and lobbyists and the ideology of we live exclusively in the left spectrum. We're not really operating in the conservative spectrum at all because the center of American politics is continually shifted to the left.
Now, you know, it's interesting that you bring that up because I actually do a show on Saturday mornings with a liberal co-host. It's actually gone through a couple of iterations at this point, and now I have a much younger liberal co-host, and he points out all of the time that as this country has progressed, our paradigm has slowly shifted to the left, and he ultimately feels like that at some point his side is going to completely win the argument and basically win the day. I'm not so sure I agree with that because while the pendulum does continually shift, it is much like the pendulum on a clock. Eventually, at some point, it's going to go so far that it's going to have to come back the other direction if we can keep ourselves in between the lines long enough, so to speak, because at this point, I think we're pretty far over to the left-hand shoulder at this point. I think we're about to run ourselves off the road. And this president's behavior reiterates that to me almost on a daily basis. But so we've answered the question of D.C. Now, a bit of a wider brush here, but again in generalities. Do you feel like it's common sense is pretty much dead in America now as well, or do you think it's pretty much confined to D.C., or is it starting to be an issue where the atrophy of common sense is beginning to spread, so to speak?
Well, first of all, I agree with you about the pendulum swing. And I have a lot of confidence in the way that our government was structured by our founders. It's been degraded to a degree. That's another show, the specific things that have kind of degraded the original vision of it. But you're right, the pendulum might swing back, and I'm hoping for that myself. Now, also, the point of the book is that, no, common sense is not dead in America among the average working person. And I use the term commoner. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, and it has a couple meanings that I reveal late in the book, in that it's an English term that was, originally used to kind of define status or rank between a commoner and a person that might have been in the upper echelons of society. And it has nothing to do with America. We've never used that term really. Maybe obviously back when we were founded, we might have, but it isn't something we use nowadays. And the other meaning I attribute to it, and this is the really important part, is that the collective common sense of the average working people outweighs the idiocy of D.C. 1,000 to 1. And there's a lot of collective knowledge out there through just life experience and simple common sense that must be tapped into again if we're going to save the country. And I think we're in danger of losing it at times. And it is there. It does exist. And I think that some of the pushback you see against this administration, against the Democrats, and against liberalism in general, is grounded in that common sense. So what I say, the commoner sense that's more common or widely known. And it's something that America has always relied on. And again, that's been degraded along with some of the original focus and intent of the way our government was meant to be structured, at least the way our founders saw it.
Okay. Well, no, I agree with you. There was a specific reason why I asked this question, because I'm going to bring it back around to what we started the show talking about, which was the recent terrorist attacks and the Syrian refugees that the administration and a good portion of the government are basically trying to shove down our throats sideways. I saw a poll today where the majority of the American people are opposed to bringing in the refugees. So my question is, since we've already been able to determine that obviously there's a disconnect between the American common folks and now the ruling class in D.C., because let's face it, at this point we may not think of ourselves as commoners, but that's how D.C. thinks of us. So while your book title was tongue-in-cheek, it may have been a little more prophetic than you wanted to admit. But at the same time, the thing that we need to keep in mind is these people are actually supposed to be the ones that work for us. So when 56% of the American people that are polled are opposed to things like the Syrian refugees and 60-some-odd% are opposed to shutting down Guantanamo, why is it that our elected representatives, the folks that are supposed to work for us, have all of a sudden at some point within the last 60 years become a ruling class that suddenly not only think they know better what we need than we do, but none of us are really willing to do too much about it but sit around and gripe and hem and haw about how we're slowly losing our freedoms while our government slowly takes them away from us. And before anybody starts yelling, screaming, and shouting, no, I'm not saying to break out the guns that you have buried in your basement that nobody knows are there. That's I'm not advocating armed revolt. I'm saying there has to be a happy medium somewhere where we can remember that these idiots that we're sending to D.C. are actually supposed to work for us. So, again, and back to the original question, because I kind of went all over the map there, but why is it that there can be such a large polling difference between what the American people actually want and what's happening in D.C., and nothing changes for us? I don't understand where we've gone to the point where we don't really hold our representatives accountable anymore when they obviously do not do the things that we tell them they ought to be doing.
Well, first of all, I actually do say in the book that that our government now kind of views us as commoners. And I say, we are formally known as American citizens. And we already have a great title, that of American citizen. But you're right, absolutely right. And I do say that in the book. Our government views us as nothing more than commoners. Now, as far as the disconnect in D.C. goes, that goes back to the lobbyists and the money. And there has been some pushback, though. You have to think about this, that in state senates and governors of states, the Democrats are actually in a lot of political trouble at that level. They've lost a lot of seats over the year. So there is more response to maybe not in the way that you're perceiving it, but there is more political response than you think. But we do a lot of this through the filter of looking at what goes on in D.C., which looks like a very muted response, and it is from the Republicans in D.C. So I hold out hope that there is a response. But I mentioned in the book that the Wilson basically enacted the 17th Amendment, where he made senators elected by popular vote, and they became more beholden to D.C. than being representatives of their state that were voted in by their state legislature at the time, or that were appointed by their state legislature at the time. And it was a big deal when it happened. And he really did take us to a point where we got very disconnected from our government and became more D.C.-centric. And now what you're seeing, Rick, is what happens in D.C., and you're saying, well, geez, where's the reaction, because they're supposed to represent us and stuff like that. And we have a changing demographic that might not, react in the way that you think is common sense, because you have people migrating from socialist countries that have listened to that kind of siren song of socialism their whole lives, and they kind of look at us as being socialist light, so they don't have what you might consider would be a typical common sense American response to things. And unfortunately, the combination of all those things is what you're seeing, or in your case, not seeing.
No, I guess I can see the point there, because, and you're right, a lot of it may be the fact that maybe people aren't reacting the way that I hope they would react. But I guess my biggest question with all of this still remains, how is it that we could have, back to this current thing that everybody's been talking about, the Syrian refugees. We have an entire group in D.C. that wants these people here, regardless of how we feel about it. And we as the American people just seem to be sitting back and saying, well, I guess we're going to get some refugees. And I guess I don't really understand where the breakdown is coming from. And I know I keep coming back to that, but it's just me still trying to wrap my head around the idea that, again, we seem to view common sense as something that is not relevant anymore. Because, and it goes back to something that I said last night that somebody else pointed out a much better way. When I was talking about the tainted M&Ms, it would be akin, some of these arguments about, well, it's only 20% of these people that want to hurt us and this, that, and the other. Well, most of the time when they do the product recalls, it's only usually about 10 or 15% of whatever product batch that's actually been tainted. So why would we need to recall the whole batch if all we have to do is worry about 10 or 15% of, let's say, some bad chicken? There's some chicken in a certain processing plant that may have been tainted with E. coli. They've only found one sample of it, yet they basically recall all of it that they can think possibly might have been contaminated by it. Why is that? It's common sense. It's safety, because it's much better to bring it all back in and instead of exposing somebody to something that might actually kill them. So why is our political system so much different than that? I don't understand it, because there are a vast number of these people that legitimately want to kill us. They have been raised their entire lives to believe that we are evil, and they want us dead, gone, and wiped off the map. And why is that okay?
Well, it goes way back, Rick. In my mind, and I do lay this out in commoner sense, the progressive movement pre and post Civil War, as the seeds were planted, and then it came along in the early part of the 20th century, is an ideology which is a kind of a religion. It's all about ideology, and at that point, common sense, any kind of practical thought is thrown out the window. That's what Obama practices, that's what the progressive practice, and that's what a lot of the people in D.C. practice. And like I said, the spin-off sect of the religion of liberalism is political correctness, which is, in my mind, the first step towards, enlisting in a death cult for a culture, politically and socially. So with that said, that's why you're not seeing the common sense applied. It's only about ideology and political power. Common sense doesn't enter into it. It's just about the guilt trip that they trade in and trying to maintain power. And I'm not sure why they're like that, but I think that that maybe it isn't only Obama that is a little bit touched, let's say.
Well, no, I mean, at this point, it's the same thing that I've pointed out on a lot of shows, not every single one that I've done, but at this point, if you really want to look at the political parties, I've gotten to the point where I really can't see much of a difference anymore. They all basically kind of want the same things, just for different reasons. Much like the immigration argument. The Democrats want it for votes, the Republicans want it for cheap labor. And that's basically what it comes down to. They want the same things, but they want them for different reasons. Each time power shifts in D.C., the only thing that really changes is where the money's going and which groups are benefited by whichever side is currently in power. The issue that we have there, though, is that no matter which way it goes, the same folks are usually somewhere involved or embedded in whichever groups are receiving the money. And it's like you pointed out, not only in your book, but on tonight's show, that, it's all about the lobbyists, because that's really where the focus is anymore. It's not even necessarily the politicians that are wielding the power anymore, because they've basically become walking meat suits for the lobbyists.
Well, reforming the tax code could go a long way to turning the money changers' tables over at the temple, so to speak. So I hope that we do get significant tax reform.
Yeah, I actually, one of the things that I would really, really love to see is basically kind of a fair tax type system, where basically you are taxed based on the amount you spend, whether you are a corporation or a person. And, and we could still find ways to make that fair. If you are below a certain income level and you can validate that you're working legitimately and below a certain income level, we could give you a card that you swipe that makes you tax exempt. So not only that, could we help the people that are less fortunate by making them exempt from the taxes? For the folks that can't validate their income and where it's coming from, we can still, like for the panhandlers that are going around the corner and hopping into a Lexus, we can start making sure that they're actually paying taxes too. So it would fix so many problems. But again, it all goes back to the fact that there's no such thing as common sense in D.C. anymore. Just saying.
Well, when you have 73,000 pages in the tax code, obviously that's structured to benefit lobbyists and politicians. That's not structured to benefit the average working person. He can't take advantage of that. It only hurts him. And that's why the law. I'm really glad that it's been a topic of conversation to possibly reform it. There's a lot of good plans out there. Just as long as we do reform it somehow, take a step in that direction, it would be great for the economy and great for the average American working person. I really hope that it happens. It's a big deal.
You are right. That it is. All right, so at this point, we are actually already starting to wind down to the end of the show. I know, yet again, nearly another hour already in the books, and every time I have you on, Patrick, I look at the clock and start thinking, where did the time go? But before we run out of time, I want to do what I always do in case we have folks that are tuning in and hearing you for the first time. Remind them of who you are, what it is that you do, and where they can interact with you should they choose to do so.
Well, the title of the book is Commoner Sense, The Working Person's Guide to America. You can get it on Amazon very easily as an ebook or get a paperback sent to you quite quickly. You can follow me on Twitter at FenariSense or on Facebook. Facebook, you'll find a lot of links to interviews and also to articles that I do that you can access at magiccitynews.com. They've got about 15 articles of mine that they've published from this year that are up to date, and the topics are all about current politics. And if you go to Facebook, you'll see the links to several of them, and you can find all of them at that site.
All right. Well, I, of course, am Rick Robinson, host of America Off the Rails. Just in case somebody's tuning in for the first time, you can interact with me in the following ways. You can follow me on Twitter at @double_R_OKC. You can find me on Facebook on my professional page at www.facebook.com/RowdyRicky Robinson. You can shoot me an email in one of two places, ricky@thesparkradionetwork.com or rick@k98talk.com. And, of course, at some point, when we get all the kinks worked out, you'll be able to reach me on a call-in number, but so far my network will not really handle the extra strain, so we're not able to do that for the moment. Now, for tomorrow night's show, we actually will have a very special guest. One of the our social media campaign directors for Dr. Kelly Ward, who is currently in a fight to unseat the McRhino known as McCain, will be joining us tomorrow night for the hour right here on America Off the Rails. And again, I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you, Mr. Patrick Fernari, for coming on again and hanging out with us for the evening. For anyone who's interested, he'll actually be on with me for a little bit on WNJC tomorrow at 2 Eastern, so make sure you tune in for that as well. And of course, as always, if you miss the shows anywhere live, you can always find us in a plethora of places for the on-demand content, including but not limited to Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeart, FM Player, and there's a couple more that I know I'm forgetting again. But again, it's just one of those things where there come a time when you put your stuff in so many places, it gets to be really hard to keep up with it. But at this point, that is going to do it for this particular episode of America Off the Rails. I am, of course, Rick Robinson. I will be back with you tomorrow night. Before you know it, keep your head up, keep your powder dry, and just remember, no matter what happens in D.C., there is still common sense throughout the rest of the country, no matter what they want to tell you. We'll be back with you tomorrow night, folks. Do not go away, and before you know it, I'll be here again. So you guys have a great night. Be safe, God bless, and I'll see you when I see you.
Everything you earn by breaking your backs, we're gonna redistribute when we make our pay tax. Hey, sit back down.
Screw you guys. I'm going home. Later.
Game over, man. It's game over.
When our water heater broke down last month, it was a nightmare. It took 5 hours for the plumber to show up, and he charged us a couple of $100 just to come out. And then it cost another $1,800 to put in the new water heater. By the time it was all said and done, I felt like I'd been taken. But what else could I do?
The smartest thing you can do is get a home warranty from American Residential Warranty. Their home warranties pay to repair or replace all your major appliances when they break, and they will break, and at the worst possible time. Call American Residential Warranty right now for free information on home warranties starting at just pennies a day. Don't wait for your refrigerator to stop running or your ceiling fans to stop turning. Call American Residential Warranty right now. Ask how you can save up to 50% on washer and dryer coverage. Just call 1-800-513-6154. That's 1-800-513-6154. Again, 1-800-513-6154. Call now.